It is Tuesday, January 2026, and if you are scrolling through your newsfeed this morning, you are probably feeling a distinct sense of vertigo because the world didn't just change overnight. It feels like the entire game board was just flipped over.
Yeah.
We are staring down the barrel of a trade war, but it is definitely not the one the pundits have been predicting for the last 5 years.
No, this isn't chips in Taiwan or, solar panels in Shenzhen. This is something else. Something else entirely.
The United States has just slapped a 10% tariff, which, by the way, is scheduled to hit 25% by June on 8 European nations.
And we're not talking about small players.
No, we're talking Germany, France, the UK, the Netherlands. These are, the oldest friends in the Rolodex.
It's a massive escalation. Usually when we talk about transatlantic trade disputes, we're in the weeds. We're talking about steel dumping margins or subsidies for EV batteries.
Right. It's dry, technical stuff.
Super dry. But the trigger for this action sounds like it was pulled from a frantic game of risk, not modern diplomacy.
Yeah. That is the part that just jumps off the page in the sources we're looking at today. These tariffs are explicitly contingent on a deal for the complete and total purchase of Greenland.
Which, brings us to the even more alarming reports of European military personnel deploying to Greenland at Denmark's request.
So we aren't just looking at a trade spat.
No. We're witnessing a genuine standoff, with military posturing between the pillars of the post-war order.
And the reaction from Europe has been instantaneous. French President Emmanuel Macron isn't just sending angry tweets.
No.
He's calling for the immediate activation of the Anti-Coercion Instrument, the ACI.
Which sends a chill down the spine of anyone who follows global trade law. The ACI was built back in 2023 as a break glass in case of emergency weapon.
And it has never been fired.
Never.
So we have a stack of documents here to help us make sense of this madness, including a comprehensive strategic analysis titled U.S. Retaliatory Trade Policy and the Fortress America Framework. And the mission of this deep dive is to figure out if we just woke up in an alternate reality. Because the central thesis of these documents is, well, it's terrifyingly simple. This isn't an accident.
Right. The analysis argues that this is not a diplomatic tantrum that got out of hand. It is a calculated, premeditated strategy.
The source calls it Fortress America. And while fortress sounds defensive, the moves we're seeing are incredibly aggressive.
Aggressive moves for a defensive goal. That's the nuance we need to get our heads around. The argument here is that the United States is initiating a controlled decoupling.
Right, but not just from China. Everyone expected that.
Not just from China. From the global system the U.S. itself built. It's a move toward what they call resource autarky.
Yeah.
Total self-sufficiency.
Which implies the U.S. is willing to effectively blow up the Western alliance to get there.
If the prize is big enough. The analysis says yes.
So before we get to the why, the rare earths, the debt crisis, all of that, we really need to look at the how. Because this analysis lays out the specific weapons the U.S. is pointing at Europe right now.
Yeah.
And I have to say, some of these are creatively ruthless.
They're precise. The course refers to it as the economic arsenal. These aren't blunt instruments. They're targeted strikes on the structural weaknesses of the European economy.
Let's start with the one that stood out to me immediately, mostly because it targets a company that's become a household name over the last few years, the pharmaceutical option.
Yes.
Or, as I've been thinking of it, the Ozempic threat.
This is a textbook example of asymmetric warfare. The target is Denmark's Novo Nordisk.
The makers of Ozempic and Wegovy.
Correct. And to understand why this matters, you have to look at the Danish economy. These drugs aren't just a successful product. They've become the engine of Denmark's GDP growth.
The golden goose.
In many ways, they are the golden goose keeping the whole economy afloat. And the U.S. has found a legal knife to hold to its throat. 28 U.S.C. Section 1498.
I looked this up. It sounds so boring. Government patent use.
It does sound dry, but it's incredibly powerful. It effectively allows the U.S. government to use any patent it wants, provided they pay reasonable compensation.
Okay.
Usually, this is for defense contractors in wartime, like you need a specific screw for a tank. But the strategy outlined in our source material is for the U.S. to declare a metabolic health emergency.
A metabolic health emergency. So you frame the obesity crisis in America as a national security issue.
Exactly. By declaring that emergency, the government gives itself the authority to bypass the patent protections.
Yeah.
The U.S. authorizes generic manufacturing of Wegovy and Ozempic domestically.
Immediately undercutting the price.
Immediately.
So they effectively threatened to clone the drug, cut Novo Nordisk out of their biggest market, and crash the Danish economy unless they sell Greenland.
That's the leverage. But the source highlights that this is classified as high risk.
I'd say so.
If the U.S. pulls this trigger, it shatters global IP norms. If the U.S. can seize a patent because they don't like a country's foreign policy, what stops India or Brazil from doing the exact same thing to Pfizer or Moderna next year?
You open a door you can't close. It basically says patents only matter if we're friends.
Precisely. And that uncertainty is poison for innovation.
Okay, moving from biology to technology, the second weapon is the ASML threat. ASML is the Dutch company that makes the lithography machines.
That make the chips.
Yeah.
The most advanced chips in the world.
Sure.
The ones running AI models, missile guidance systems, everything.
They're the only ones.
No one else can do what ASML does. They are the bottleneck of the digital age.
And the source mentions the U.S. using the foreign direct product rule here. We've seen this used to cut off Huawei in China. But, I mean, using it against a Dutch company, a NATO ally.
It's unprecedented. Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDPR, basically says if your product uses American technology, even a tiny amount, we control who you sell it to.
And ASML does.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
ASML's machines use U.S.-made components for their EUV light sources. Those are the lasers that actually carve the transistors onto the silicon.
So the U.S. puts ASML on the entity list, which restricts their access to those lasers. Without the U.S. parts, the machines just stop running.
And ASML stock goes to zero. But, and this is a massive catch, the source calls this mutually assured destruction for the tech sector.
Because American companies need those machines too, right?
Intel, NVIDIA, Apple, they all rely on chips made with these machines.
Yeah.
If you break ASML to hurt the Netherlands, you break the supply chain for Silicon Valley.
So you might bring Europe to its knees.
But you cripple your own tech giants in the process. It's a doomsday button.
Speaking of doomsday, let's talk about the military option. The source calls this one the Poland pivot. This feels more traditional. Hard power, troops on the ground.
This is the security lever.
Yeah.
For decades, Germany has been the logistical hub of U.S. power in Europe. Ramstein Air Base, Stuttgart. These are massive centers.
Huge.
The threat here is to close them.
Not leaving Europe entirely, though? Just, what, shifting the furniture?
Just leaving Germany. The plan is to relocate those forces to Poland and Romania. The messaging is just brutal. It effectively says, we defend those who share our values.
We don't defend those who wage trade wars against us.
Exactly.
That strikes right at the heart of the German psyche. Their entire security architecture is built on that American presence.
And it creates a massive rift within the EU. You have Eastern Europe, Poland, the Baltics, who are very pro-American on security because they're staring down Russia. Then you have Western Europe, France, Germany, who are obsessed with strategic autonomy.
And this splits them right down the middle?
Completely. By favoring Poland, the U.S. effectively splits the bloc.
But the source says there's one option even more dangerous than moving troops or breaking patents. The nuclear option of finance.
This involves the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. The proposal is to designate the EU's use of the ACI, that trade defense tool, as a threat to U.S. national security.
Wait, designating a trade law as a national security threat? That seems like a massive stretch.
It is, but it allows the U.S. to sanction banks and facilitate the collection of European penalties. Essentially, if a European bank tries to collect tariffs from a U.S. company,
that bank gets cut off from the U.S. dollar system.
cut off.
That sounds incredibly powerful, but also suicidal.
The source rates the risk here as extreme. If you weaponize the dollar against your closest allies, you send a message to the entire world, including neutral powers like India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia.
Right.
You tell them that the dollar isn't a safe utility for global trade. It's a political weapon that can be turned against you at any moment.
Which gives them every single incentive to find an alternative immediately.
It accelerates the very thing the U.S. fears most, the end of dollar hegemony. If you make the dollar dangerous to hold, people stop holding it.
So the U.S. has these massive weapons, but they all have huge recoil. Now, surely Europe isn't just sitting there. We mentioned the ACI earlier. Is that their only shield?
No, and this is where the concept of mutually assured destruction becomes literal in economic terms. The ACI allows Europe to hit back with tariffs and restrict U.S. IP. And the key is how it works. It uses qualified majority voting.
Meaning a single country can't veto it.
Exactly. Hungary or a smaller state can't be bribed to block retaliation.
Mm.
It requires 55% of member states representing 65% of the population. It's designed to be agile.
But the real hammer isn't tariffs.
No, it's the treasury weapon.
The source highlights a number here that made my eyes water. $8 trillion.
That is roughly the amount of U.S. bonds and equities held by European countries. That's twice as much as the rest of the world combined. We focus so much on China holding U.S. debt.
But Europe holds the real leverage.
They hold the bulk of Western investment.
So the threat is a coordinated investment, just selling off U.S. assets en masse.
Yes. And think about the timing. We're already looking at a U.S. national debt of over $34 trillion. Borrowing costs are high. If Europe starts dumping treasuries, interest rates explode.
The stock market destabilizes.
You create a fiscal crisis in Washington instantly.
But the source mentions that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent dismissed this as media hysteria. His argument is, Europe wouldn't do it because it hurts their own portfolio.
Right. If you sell aggressively, the value of what you're holding drops. You lose money.
Yeah.
Bessent is banking on the idea that Europe acts like a hedge fund manager, rational, profit maximizing. But the source warns that he's underestimating the sovereignty factor.
I see.
If a foreign power, even an ally, tries to coerce you into giving up territory, giving up Greenland, economic pain becomes secondary to national survival. Europe might be willing to take the financial hit just to prove they cannot be bullied.
It's the cost of doing business as a sovereign nation.
Exactly.
So we have two juggernauts pointing economic nukes at each other. This brings us to the big question. Why? Why is the U.S. risking all of this? The alliance, the financial system for Greenland.
This brings us back to Fortress America. To understand the why, you have to look at the three drivers the analysis identifies: rare earths, the military window, and the debt trap.
Let's start with rare earths. We hear this term a lot, but explain why it's worth blowing up NATO over.
Because right now, China controls about 90% of the processing of rare earth elements. We're talking about neodymium, dysprosium, terbium.
The stuff you need for everything high-tech.
Everything. You cannot build the guidance system for a missile, the motor in an F-35 jet, or a modern wind turbine without them. The U.S. is critically vulnerable.
And Greenland is the fix.
Greenland, specifically the Kovanhef field deposits, is one of the largest undeveloped rare earth sites on the planet. If the U.S. controls that, it breaks China's chokehold. It secures the supply chain for the next century.
So it's about being able to build weapons without asking your biggest rival for permission.
Correct. Which ties right into the second driver, the closing military window. The analysis notes that U.S. dominance is eroding. China's Navy is building out faster than anyone expected. Hypersonic weapons are changing the calculus.
So the feeling is that the unipolar moment is ending.
It's ending. So the U.S. needs to secure its own backyard, the Western Hemisphere and the Arctic, before things get worse. It's about hunkering down.
Consolidating defensible positions.
Precisely.
And then there's the third driver, the one that feels the most cynical and honestly the hardest to wrap your head around, the debt trap.
This is the most provocative part of the source's analysis. We know the U.S. debt situation is unsustainable through normal means. You cannot tax your way out of $34 trillion.
It's mathematically impossible at this point.
It is. So what's the play? Controlled decoupling. The theory goes like this. The U.S. might actually want to accelerate de-dollarization, but on its own terms.
Wait, hold on. Why would the U.S. want to stop being the reserve currency? That's the source of their power. That's the exorbitant privilege.
Think about it from a debtor's perspective. If you owe the world trillions of dollars, and you know you can't pay it back in real value, what is your best option?
You inflate it away.
You inflate the debt away. You make the dollar worth less, so the debt is easier to pay back in nominal terms.
But you can't do that if everyone holds your currency and trusts it. If you debase the currency, you destroy the trust.
You can if you don't care about their trust anymore. That's the key shift. The strategy outlined here suggests a sequence. First, you secure the physical resources you need. That's Greenland.
Okay.
Second, you reshore your manufacturing. That's the CJPS Act. The factory's being built now. Third, once you are self-sufficient, you inflate.
So the foreigners, the Europeans, the Chinese, who are holding that $34 trillion in debt,
they get paid back in debased dollars. They get their money, but it buys half as much as it used to. It's a strategic default in all but name.
Wow.
The U.S. effectively wipes its balance sheet clean at the expense of its creditors.
That is incredibly ruthless. It's essentially stealing from your allies to save your own economy.
It is, but it explains why the U.S. is willing to antagonize its closest friends. If the long-term plan is to close the gates and rely on yourself, you don't need the alliance as much as you need the resources and the factories.
So, Fortress America isn't just a catchy name. It's a description of a country pulling up the drawbridge because it intends to flood the moat.
That's a very good way to put it. It's isolationism turbocharged by economic warfare.
So where does this leave us? If this analysis is correct, who wins this standoff?
In the short term, the U.S. has the upper hand. The energy and tech choke points are immediate. Europe hurts faster than the U.S. does.
Long term.
Long term, it accelerates the decline of American structural power.
Yeah.
If you abuse the dollar, people stop using it. But there is one clear winner mentioned in the analysis, and it isn't Washington or Brussels.
Let me guess. It's Beijing.
The China factor.
Yeah.
While the West is busy tearing itself apart, China benefits immensely. Beijing can offer trade terms to Europe. They can say, hey, the Americans are sanctioning you. We'll buy your goods.
It drives Europe right into China's arms.
Absolutely. And strategically, a fragmented Western alliance makes a move on Taiwan much, much lower risk. If the U.S. is consumed by a crisis in the Atlantic, are they really going to fight a war in the Pacific?
It's the nightmare scenario for global stability. A divided West is exactly what China has been waiting for.
The source predicts that by summer 2026, we'll likely see some kind of negotiated framework. The U.S. will probably get access to the resources in Greenland, maybe a joint venture, maybe a lease.
A case-saving deal for everyone.
Exactly. Without technically owning the island.
But the damage is done.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah.
The assumption that the U.S. and Europe are inseparable friends.
Yeah.
That ended today. The trust is gone.
That's a heavy realization. We always assume the transatlantic alliance is the bedrock of the world order. It's been the constant for 80 years. To see it treated as a transactional burden, that is a seismic shift.
It's a return to great power politics. No permanent friends, only permanent interests. We are back in the 19th century, just with better technology.
So to wrap this up, we are watching a battle over resources, rare earths, disguised as a trade war. But the stakes are actually the global financial system and the future of Western security.
It's a high-stakes gamble. The U.S. is betting it can break the system to save itself.
And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over. The source ends with a chilling implication. If this Fortress America interpretation is correct, the U.S. isn't stumbling into this crisis.
Yep.
It's not an accident. It is a deliberate demolition of the alliance system to ensure American survival in a chaotic century. The question is, if the fortress is secure, but the world outside burns, have you really won?
That is the question of the decade, and I'm not sure we're going to like the answer.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious and keep watching those headlines. We'll be back next time to help you make sense of it all.